Hi, this is Nicole Hershey, and I am going to be focusing my intervention proposal on reducing melanoma with regular sunscreen use. So first I'll start by talking about the burden that melanoma has and also ways that melanoma can be prevented. First of all, on the burden side of things, it's of the 7 most common cancers in the U.S., melanoma is the only one whose incidence is increasing. It's actually increasing. Between 2000 and 2009, it increased 1.9% annually. An estimated 73,870 new cases of invasive melanoma will be diagnosed in the U.S. in 2015. One person dies of melanoma every hour, so actually every 57 minutes, and there will be an estimated 9,940 deaths from melanoma in the U.S. in 2015. Finally, the annual cost of treating melanoma in the U.S. is estimated at $3.3 billion. And then on the prevention side of things, on the right side of this slide, you'll see 86% of melanomas can be attributed to exposure to UV radiation from the sun. So the sun is the main source of the UV radiation that's causing melanomas. And then you'll see in the next point, there's about 6,000 cases of melanoma a year attributed to indoor tanning. So that's another side of the UV radiation exposure. And then finally, regular daily use of an SPF 15 or higher sunscreen reduces the risk of developing melanoma by 50%, which you'll see that this presentation intervention proposal is going to focus on. This slide is just trying to get at a little bit of the severity of melanoma. It varies based off of the stage that you discover the melanoma at. You're looking at early stage 1, you have a 97% 5-year survival rate, and then a 10-year survival rate of 95%. Early stage 3 or stage 2, you'll see 81% 5-year survival rate and a 67% 10-year survival rate. Stage 3, you'll see it's a little typo there, but the stage 3A, right above stage 3B, should be is a 5-year survival rate of 78%, and then a 10-year survival rate of 68%. And then finally, if you are diagnosed at stage 4, you have a 15 to 20% 5-year survival rate and a 10 to 15% 10-year survival rate. Some of the inherent unmodifiable risk factors for melanoma include age, gender, and also race and ethnicity. So melanoma is the most common form of cancer for young adults, aged 25 to 29 years old, and the second most common form of cancer for young people 15 to 29 years old. So of the melanoma cases among 18 to 29-year-olds who had tanned indoors, 76% were attributable to tanning bed use. So tanning is a major cause for young adults. And then an estimated 42,670 new cases of invasive melanoma in men and 31,200 in women will be diagnosed in the U.S. in 2015. At current rates, the lifetime risk of an American developing invasive melanoma is 1 in 59 overall, and 1 in 39 for white men and 1 in 58 for white women. So you see that men overall, and I say that because we'll get into some studies in adolescence later, but men overall for all ages are more likely to develop melanoma. And then the annual incidence rate for melanoma is 1 per 100,000 in African Americans, 4 per 100,000 in Hispanics, and 25 per 100,000 in non-Hispanic whites. So you see that non-Hispanic whites have the highest incident rate of melanoma when you look at race and ethnicity. And now we'll look at preventable risk factors. Sustaining 5 or more sunburns in youth increases your lifetime melanoma risk by 80%. So avoiding sunburn and sun exposure is a huge preventable, modifiable point. And then more people are developing skin cancer because of tanning than develop lung cancer because of smoking. So again, tanning comes up. And then just one indoor tanning session increases a user's chances of developing melanoma by 20%. So as you'll see later on in the presentation, my study is mainly going to be focusing on children, adolescents, and young adults. So I found a study that did some similar analysis looking at the same population. It was by Hannah Weir et al. And they're looking at just invasive melanoma and in the age ranges of 15 to 39 years old. You'll see at the top, females, their incidence rate ratio, or IRR, was 1.69. So it's a little bit reversed from what you see in the overall population when you just look at youth. And then you'll see also as age increases down in the meat of the table that the 35 to 39-year-old age group has a 7 in the 7 range for both males and females IRR. And then I'll just point out also race and ethnicity. You can see that compared to non-Hispanic whites, the Hispanic whites, blacks, Asian Islander, and Pacific Islander groups, they all are protective. Their race ethnicity is protective of melanoma because their IRRs are below 1 in all of those categories. So now we'll talk about the risk factors that we're going to target. So children and adolescents and young adults are going to be targeted in my particular intervention study. We're going to do ages 4 through 29. Children are going to be targeted because although melanoma is uncommon in this group, it is likely that sun exposure in this group, other studies have shown, contributes to melanoma later in life. So the earlier we catch them, the better. Adolescents and young adults will be targeted also because melanoma is the most common form of cancer for those groups, as you saw in the previous slides. Half of all adults aged 18 to 29 report at least one sunburn in the past 12 months. So we know that sunburn is an issue for this age group, and it's something that we can target and help start preventing these exposures. And then currently, limiting exposure to UV radiation is the only established modifiable cause of melanoma. There's sun avoidance, shade, and clothing modifications as one method, and then the use of sunscreen, which is actually kind of controversial. A lot of meta-analysis have shown that sunscreen is not effective in preventing melanoma, but most of these have looked at trials that used inadequate SPF of levels of like 6, because this was back in the day when sunscreen wasn't as good as it is now. So there has been a randomized trial that has looked at the use of sunscreen for prevention of melanoma, and this was by Green et al. Participants were randomly assigned into an intervention group, daily sunscreen application, which involved daily sunscreen application, and a comparison group, which they just had normal discretionary sunscreen use. The trial took place in Australia, and it included 1,621 residents aged 20 to 69 years old and occurred between 1992 and 1996. Melanoma occurrence was monitored for 10 years until 2006, and analysis found that risk of melanoma overall was reduced in those randomly assigned daily sunscreen use. So the hazard ratio was 0.50 with a confidence interval that's a little bit large, 0.24 to 1.02, and a borderline statistical significance, probably due to their smaller sample size. And then invasive melanoma reduced, so specifically invasive melanoma was reduced by 73% in the sunscreen group with a hazard ratio of 0.27, a little bit better of a confidence interval there, and actual statistical significance with the 0.045 p value. So the Green et al. Study kind of admitted that they had some limitation in their study design in that they did not it wasn't designed to alter early life sun exposure, and they suggested long-term sunscreen intervention among children and adolescents. So that's the objective of this study, to determine if there is a difference in the relative risk of developing melanoma within 10 years for children, adolescents, and young adults, individually in a community-based randomized trial of sunscreen application in coastal states of the United States. Different age groups will help determine the best point of intervention, so we're divvying them up and stratifying the analysis. And the coastal states are going to be used, if you remember from my surveillance project, I found that there was a higher incidence rate of melanoma in those states. So we want to try to limit the scope because this is going to get big fast, and target the most at-risk populations. So just a quick slide on study design. You'll see the age groups on the left there. We've got children aging from 4 to 11 years old, adolescents 12 to 21 years old, which is not the legal definition of an adolescent, and young adults aged 22 to 29. And you'll see this comes from the official pediatric terminology. So not what we would think of, an adult is legal at the age of 18, not what we would typically think of, but clinically, yes. And then the study design, also you'll see the 23 states in the red are what we're going to be aiming at collecting information from. So the methods: trial participants will be randomly assigned using a computer-generated randomized list with stratification of age groups. The sunscreen intervention group will be provided with a free, unlimited supply of broad-spectrum sunscreen. We're going to use SPF 16 because that was what was used in the green study, and we'll be asked to apply each morning. Participants will be asked to apply each morning to the head, neck, arms, and hands with reapplication after heavy sweating, swimming, bathing, or long sun exposure. The comparison group, so placebo or asking them never to use sunscreen would be completely unethical. So this group is going to be advised to apply sunscreen of any SPF at their normal discretionary frequency. The intervention portion of the study will last 4 years, so they'll be doing the sunscreen application for 4 years, and the follow-up is going to last 10 years with an optional extension. We'll talk about that later. Questionnaires and measurements of the provided sunscreen bottles will help monitor the use of sunscreen in the intervention group. And then local cancer registries and questionnaires will be used to record melanoma cases. We'll also be using some questionnaires at the beginning of the study to kind of get their history and background, and questionnaires throughout the study to monitor their sun exposure. So using the tables that were provided to us as part of this coursework, I determined what our sample size would approximately need to be for the stratification with 90% power and 5% significant. Total sample sizes of approximately 130,000 per age group will need to be obtained. I know this sounds large, but the proportion of melanoma is as low as 0.001. Green indicated that people in the intervention group had a relative risk of 0.5 for not having melanoma, so that's what we're going to target at, and then we're going to plan to enroll half in the intervention group and half into the comparison group, and use a one-sided hypothesis test. Estimates are based off of the assumption that 20 to 30% are going to be lost to follow-up as well. Considering that 23 states are going to be enrolled, this breaks down to about 5,500 per state, with 2,250 in each arm. So these are large numbers, but considering it's a relatively minimal effort study and there's no major risks, and the enrollment should be relatively easy at that point. So there's two types of anticipated outcomes. There's the intervention-based. Those in the intervention arm will have a lower risk of melanoma as determined by the 10-year follow-up period when compared to those in the comparison group for each age group. And then it would not be expected that the child group ages 4 to 11 at enrollment will have many cases of melanoma at the final 10-year follow-up. They'll only be ages 14 through 21. Therefore, the effect of sunscreen intervention may not be as evident in this group. And then demographic observations, those enrolled in the adolescent and young adult group will have the highest incidence of melanoma during follow-up period. This is based on the evidence found in the study by Weir, that table that was shown earlier. And then non-Hispanic Caucasians will have the highest risk of melanoma. Females will have the highest risk of melanoma in these age groups as well. And I added the demographic observations. I know it's not the point of this complete intervention study, but it would be a shame to have all of that data and not use it. So quickly, the study strengths. The study represents a reflection of the current capabilities of sunscreen with extensive follow-up. A lot of former trials have used outdated SPF that doesn't compare to what we have today. This is testing a hypothesis in a novel population that is most at risk. So this young population has never really been studied. And then use of communities in coastal states will lead to high impact and translatable results for those communities. And it's also the non-randomized trials that have been done with sunscreen before are unable to distinguish main determinants of sunscreen use with causes of melanoma. So the argument here is that people who use sunscreen are those that are likely to burn, and therefore they're also more likely to develop melanoma. So those trials it's really hard to disentangle the differences between predispositions to melanoma and also why you're using sunscreen. And then the study limitations. The scope of the study is limited to the coastal states. It's kind of a double-edged sword. We want the study is big, so we wanted to limit some things so we could manage it. And that was one of them. And we're looking at the most affected group, but how translatable is this going to be to non-coastal states? We don't know. And then extensive follow-up is labor-intensive and requires significant financial investment. That's why we limited it to only the coastal states for that reason. And then study results will be delayed due to follow-up requirements, so we have to wait 10 years to get the results. And then requirements for a large sample size to detect differences is cumbersome, so it's going to be very intensive study. Here you'll see all of my references. And then finally, I just want to thank all of my classmates and the professors. It's been a great semester. And I wish you all the best, although some of us will be starting up again in the summer. I hope you enjoy your summer.